Every single time I've designed almost anything through my entire life, the first thing I do is I look at both sides of the coin at that moment. So I can design a hammer, but are you going to build a house with it, or are you going to knock somebody out with it? Even 3D printers. When 3D printers were first coming out, which is like the mid 90s, I started to see them at technical school conferences. The very first thing I thought in my head, but did not say out loud, because I'm like, this will happen. And it did happen. I said, imagine if I were sitting on a plane, I had access via, say, like a smartphone, and I could send a file from my phone to my printer at home. And by the time I got there, I had a template to put together a disposable gun. It's been done. It's been done. So those are the things that people like me need to think about at the onset, because we can see how those things progress, and it's I cannot afford with some of the things that I do to be, willfully ignorant.
Hello and welcome to another episode of David Talks With, a podcast that popularizes without compromising serious science. This is your host, David Zhang, and today I'm in conversation with Mr. Aaron Billet. Mr. Billet is an inventor, culinary instructor, and freelance interpreter. In this episode, we talked about design thinking, methods of learning, and how to create meaningful products. I found our topics very helpful in many ways, and I hope you do so as well. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to David Talks With on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or any platform of choice. Wherever you're tuning in from, I hope you enjoy this episode and have a wonderful day. Mr. Billet, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and let's get started.
Certainly, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to this.
So let's start with a question on the human brain. What is something about the brain that you have found to be very intriguing or that has attracted your attention?
Okay. Yeah. I think one of the things that I find really fascinating is the ability to adapt and have neuroplasticity. And so I looked into a lot of the different things that allow that to happen. And I learned a lot about that, not only from personal experience, but also kind of reaching across various disciplines and seeing any kind of analogs that were there, right? So it's informed me quite a bit on AI, for example. It's informed me on traffic patterns, all kinds of things that maybe are not, seemingly obvious to a lot of people. I tend to see those things quite easily. However, as a child, actually, I had several brain surgeries, which were obviously neurological in nature. And after many, many surgeries, the fact that I was able to recover and still be, a functional member of society I'm obviously appreciative of it. Um, and so what I started to do is kind of look across all kinds of disciplines and see what are the things that we could do with the absolute most advanced technology to address the issues of things like brain cancer and cysts and all these other things that occur in the neurological world. And so one of the things that I was looking at is they have what they call a resection surgery. And so that's the one that most people are probably familiar with, where you physically go and take a physical piece of the brain out. Okay, there's other types as well, like disconnect and all kinds of neat stuff. But the in this case, the resection, where you're physically pulling that piece of brain out. So I thought, okay, if that's the case, we now have a piece that has definite volume, definite shape, et cetera, et cetera. What can we do with that? Because now we're giving someone essentially a neurological deficit, they call neurological insult, as a result of taking a piece of their brain out. So I
Exactly.
thought, there's got to be a way to fix that, right? So I thought, what if we could take a resection, take this physical piece of brain out, go into while in the operating theater in real time, go over, take a three-dimensional, what they call a volumetric scan, where you can see it from every given axis, size, dimension, et cetera, and then use that to form a real-time CAD model where you could then take things like cellulose 3D printing and print a physical mold in real time. And then using things like alginate gel, for example, you could actually fill that in and physically remold a kind of a sort of jigsaw puzzle piece to go back in the brain where you just took that tissue out, right? And so by populating this with whether it be soft nanoparticles, whether it be liposomes, you're trying to give functionality back to that area that has been removed. And things like alginate, for example, have naturally occurring nanopores. So when you look at the brain as a whole globally, you say, okay, what is it that the brain does other than structural? Well, it also needs to have, fluid movement through it. So if I am designing this, how do I get the fluids through it? If I'm designing this, how do I ensure that there's a replacement for what would have been the glial cells, these supporting structures? Okay, I use the gel. If I have liposomes, or if I have micelles, or if I have any other kind of stem cell material, by those attaching on the interface between the living brain and this fabricated structure, you then have the ability for it to start to actually creep in and create physical hardwired connections with new neurons. It also so happens that things like boron, elemental boron, on the brain actually help with things like memory, motor control, things of that nature. So it's very useful to say someone that has, let's say, Parkinson's or what have you, you can then go and actually put a dispersion of this in and have it just kind of spread through and maybe even help someone's memory or cognition.
Indeed. So let's dive deeper on this insertion and replacement technology. So, what are some of the potential incompatibilities that may arise? I mean, since you're interjecting like a foreign part into somebody's brain.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. Now, see, alginate is completely bio-friendly, completely bio-friendly. And it also has the structural components and the rigidity and the things that would make it compatible with this application. So I don't, if you're familiar with the term syneresis, where you see things that are like in gels that tend to kind of exude the liquid after, where the water component kind of comes out. So if you've ever seen like, yogurt has syneresis, for example, the water component, right? So this is made in such a way where there's enough channels within that you've got things like cerebral spinal fluid, any kind of blood exchange that's able to permeate this structure and connect to existing tissues. So it was meant to use a biological structure, which is then compatible with an already living structure for that good melding of those properties.
And how long have you been working on this idea?
Um, 2 months.
2 months. So,
Mhm.
2 months in, and so far you've made a lot of progress.
I would say that in understanding, I mean, and I appreciate the compliment, obviously. I would say I'd made a lot of progress in the way to approach the different aspects of it, because I have a pretty non-typical background, and so a lot of the things that I've learned how to approach something as complex as this not only comes from my personal neurological history, it also comes from being a former chef and chef instructor. So seeing analogs that are present in food every day that maybe a typical researcher, because they don't have that intimate knowledge in that area, can't say like, oh, well, this really is like this, but I never thought of it that way. And this is how, so I tend to make those greater connections, no pun intended, obviously, as to how it might work should they all be combined holistically.
Yeah. So about your way of thinking, you were in culinary, you're an inventor, and you've worked as a translator. So your experience seems to be all over the place. And why is that?
Well, it's interesting because as disparate as those all seem, they really aren't. They really do have a common through line. Um, and what a lot of that has to do with, I always wanted to go to chef school, even from the time I was a kid. And So I worked at a restaurant while in high school. I had one of my chef instructors when I was attending career and technical school, people used to call VOTEC school. I then went on to the CIA. No, not that CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, where I got a fantastic education beyond compare. Right. The other, well, and it's funny too, because right, we had the acronym first because the other CIA was founded in 47 and we were founded in 46. So beat them to it, right? But but uh but again, linking this all together, right? So I had the culinary experience, and then I transitioned from that to becoming a chef instructor, and in the meantime was teaching at some points culinary completely bilingually, right? So what I've done throughout is try to make the connections that I know are highly valuable, that when I was in high school, for example, when I would go to a restaurant, there's a bunch of Latinos in the kitchen, so it's like, if I learn Spanish, I will have a better opportunity in the job market if I do this. Right. So everything was kind of strategically planned. Uh, and then even now with interpreting, bringing just a myriad of different experiences has been very, very useful to me, and even let me see things in an even more different way, right? Because if you I'm as I know you're a multilingual as well, but for anyone out there that's ever studied, for example, Spanish, you'll have these stems or these roots, and it's like, okay, this means this so far, but when I add these endings, it makes them mean something else. So if you look at it like a multi-tool, whenever I think about something, I say at the base of it, just like, if you will, here, like the root or the stem of a verb in Spanish. What I say is, what do I really need to get down to as the absolute base, whether it's theory, structure, whatever else. And then, just like in, again, using the Spanish analogy, putting those different endings on that stem give it different functions, right? So it's like when you can see and make those comparisons between, okay, well, when I see, this, I'm actually seeing this. So um, whether it be even looking at, say, like food's a meta material,
Yeah,
right? If you look at a sandwich is a
combination
laminar,
of
it's a laminar structure.
yeah.
You spread butter on the bread and put it on the grill. You've just functionalized it. That's functionalization of material, etc.
So you seem to be very good at finding these synergies across multiple fields and disciplines. Do you approach this ahead of time? Like, do you have it all detailed out and mapped out, or is this really after the fact thinking?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. So if I want to solve a given problem, I will do the research. I will have an idea as to what I think might be an analogy to it. And then I'll go and I'll either confirm that or deny that through research. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. What can we now do with it? Right? Or here's what people are doing. Here's the thing that they say they're working on that they haven't yet fixed. And I'll go, oh, that's just like this. And then I can use my background to inform myself as to how to move forward.
Yeah, so the problem solving mindset. See a problem, tackle a problem, find connections, and then address the problem. But you've also mentioned a lot of fundamental skills that you possess. How important do you think these fundamental skills are in terms of solving problems? And do you mind defining these fundamental skills?
And they are invaluable. So I think that sometimes people think in too much of a concrete way. And
Yes.
when you can go into the abstract, into the conceptual level of something, they're like, okay, if I say I want the definition of this, okay, so I go, but guess what? If you say, okay, what's a light? And you go, okay, well, a light can be an LED, a light can be a light bulb, a light can be, thermiotic emission from something that's a glowing tip in
Yeah.
plasma.
It
But
could be a
it's like
laser.
day. Right, exactly. So at the end of the day, if you say to somebody, "What's a light?" and they say, "Well, this flashlight." Okay, it contains the word light, yes, but what is it actually doing? It's illuminating something through some kind of process. So I look at things that's something that I've always recommended to my students as well is how to look at something so that you understand how it applies across a universe of applications rather than just what you're looking. That's the true sense of out of the box thinking. It's like, okay, I'm an engineer. I study this and this and this. Okay, that's great. And you might know that and that and that. Perfect. But when you go to apply it to other applications, so you're like, okay, that's not my wheelhouse. Well, it's like, yes, it is. But if you can't see, for example, that whether you're using a welding torch or whether you're using a caulking gun or whether you're applying, you know, frosting on a cake, it's all the same principle, just different media.
Would you say that the ability to identify the more common channels in terms of these different skills, do you think that's based on experience or knowledge from other people or just a keen observation?
I think all three of those apply actually. I mean, I've had different I've worked in various scenarios from literally the homeless to multimillionaires. So you get exposure to even the different, socioeconomic strata, which informs you in certain ways philosophically. You learn things again from like classical teachers and whatnot, academic things. That's great. And as any of us have, there's always that trial and error, and there's always that insatiable curiosity to do something that hopefully has never been done before, but will work.
How important do you think is reflection and introspection in this process? Do you reflect a lot on what you've done
I will, if I have the chance, I will literally sit and think for 4 hours straight.
for 4 hours straight?
Absolutely.
How do you do that? Is your attention span incredibly long?
What a lot of what it comes down to is patience and not having the fear of failure, right? So it's like if I if I mean I'm trying to think of a specific example right now, but I know that I am unable both physically and at my age to go and play for the NBA, right? It doesn't mean that I won't play a basketball game, but it means that I will have to adapt to my specific needs, whether it's a conventional way or not. That actual adaptability is what facilitates it for me. And at the end of the day, if you're doing it for your own purposes, don't box yourself in by classical like rules.
No, no, yeah, flexibility is key. It's sort of like neuroplasticity in the brain. I mean, a lot of people with dysfunctional parts might have other parts that just come up and replace its functionality and works perfectly fine.
And see that's great that you actually said that because that was the part actually with this like Lego piece of like artificial brain tissue is the theory was as you were saying, like there's what they call functional neuroplasticity, where it's like, okay, this part no longer works, so you over there in this part of the brain take over, make it happen, right?
Yeah.
But there's also structural neuroplasticity where the actual surface area and undulations and convolutions on the brain proper will actually physically change with attainment of new knowledge and new experiences. So the goal there was not only to say, okay, there's a piece missing, let's replace it. The other idea was combining what I had mentioned prior with, say, like cognitive therapy, where you could potentially, again, this is obviously theory, right? You could theoretically put that new piece of artificial brain tissue in, and then by training, or whether it's through like physical OT, PT, speech pathology, whatever, you might be able to literally have the brain adapt and shift that functionality from where it's been dealing with it in the meantime and force it back into place once that tissue recognizes this is where I belong and this is where that skill set belongs.
To just take a deeper dive onto that, the common perception is that certain parts of the brain may have certain functionalities, Are you saying that these functionalities can actually change over time, or is there like a general correlation?
Both. Both. So yes, there are region specifics of the brain that control various aspects, absolutely. But then there are also things that, depending upon traumatic brain injury, whatever, that if that is like saying, okay, we don't have a full connection here anymore, but we still have to get this job done. Let's divide our resources, kind of divide and conquer, and go over here and see how we can adapt to what's deficient in one area to another. But the thing is, people can also, again, like if you've taken anyone that's taken any kind of like a rehabilitation of any kind, through that practice, through the different exercises, cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., people start to make actual physical connections on a neurological level again. Whether it's atrophied beyond repair isn't an individual thing, but if you could transfer through neuroplasticity the reconnection of this area, except now you're just doing it through an artificial mass.
I think a lot of times it's pretty incredible how much the brain is able to accomplish. I mean, the brain is the most complicated machine we know so far. Not to call humans machines, but the brain is very, very, very intricate and elaborate. I mean, for goodness sake, it runs on 5 watts of power. ChatGPT runs on thousands and thousands more of that.
It's interesting that you said that, because one of the things I wanted to bring up with you as well is, because of that, because of the natural voltage in there, like you said, the wattage in there. If you're not familiar, or anyone else, and I can't presume either way, what a TPMS sensor is, a tire pressure monitoring system. So
How does that work?
okay, so basically there's a small battery that powers essentially a radio antenna. And when there's a difference from the base pressure to lower pressure, it sends a signal to the computer in your car, and it says, hey, there's something wrong here.
I see.
Right. So it's all through RF. So that being said, what we've seen over the last couple of years is that things like graphene have the ability, when there are things like ionic droplets that go across its surface area, it will produce an electric current. And so if you can imagine taking even, say, like graphene like structures, putting them in this gel, and that way, as any ionic fluid flows over it, and if not, here's where this is what they call the MEMS, the MEMS, which is the mechanical system. That's the thing that lets your tire pressure sensor work. And so you may have heard of things like the lab on a chip as well. It will take in different fluids, it will analyze it, it'll put it back out, it can give you results, and it's a completely self-contained system. If anyone out there has ever seen like the blood monitoring system that you put on your shoulder, that's a MEMS device. That's this ultra small device. So it's also the things that you have on your backup sensors on your car. Okay, so they're very, very tiny. They're very, minuscule, but they still work to inertially and so forth for sensors like that. So what I would propose is like we're all talking about nowadays, like the brain computer interfaces, Neuralink and all that stuff. I would propose a system in which you could use actual like planar pieces of graphene, obviously at the nano level, where if you have any of these ionic fluids going through your brain, or even if you had to supplement it with some kind of functionalized material, like let's say you took what they call a microfluidic system. And for those of you out there, that's essentially a very, very small piece of plastic or acrylic with little tiny tubes that go through it. And you can make them work like all kinds of like plumbing systems, essentially. And one of the things that they're used for a lot is for droplet formation. And so one could imagine that, let's say you needed a locally delivered medication, you could both deliver and test on the same device, micro device, directly from the outside. So essentially, you're using a shunting system to push drug delivery into that part, and then it can actually come back out, test through the same MEMS device as a lab on a chip, and if necessary, because there's droplets going down this graphene, it might be able to actually power the onboard battery to send signals via antenna.
That's amazing. I think that would certainly be very incredible to have these devices in our bodies, especially in our brain. But do you think, like, would there be the potential scenario where, say, one of these devices poke through like your vessel or something like that?
You mean you talk about from the
Yeah,
inside of the brain? I mean, there's always the potential of things like cysts and growth and things as well that entrap the functionality. Yes, it's been shown that certain nanomaterials have sharp edges because they are only 2D in structure. So if you can imagine taking a razor blade, I mean, we can see all
yeah,
the dimensions of that. We've
it's
got something
incredibly
that we
sharp.
don't even see the exactly very sharp. So yes, excuse me. Yes, the answer to that is yes, it certainly could happen. It could damage surrounding interstitial fluid and all kinds of structural elements. So yes, that would need to be engineered very, very precisely and probably take a decade or more to make it a reality.
Just in a decade or more?
I would say, um, because the thing is, and I'm sure you've seen this, I'm sure your listeners have seen this too, is that and I'll do a side note to this afterwards because I think you'll appreciate it, right? Is
Certainly.
now that we have AI available to us, it typically will give us insights into things that sometimes even collectively people can't figure out unless you see things like in this grand versus completely empirical nature, right? So remember, whenever you feed an AI system training data, it's taking that and it's learning from it, and it's
Yeah,
learning from it, right? So, but the thing when I see AI is, first of all, I'm an eternal optimist in general, but every single time I've designed almost anything during my entire life, the first thing I do is I look at both sides of the coin at that moment. So I can design a hammer, but are you going to build a house with it or are you going to knock somebody out with it?
yeah.
Right. So, that it's that whole concept of
The
I was
double-edged sword.
right. Exactly. And I mean, like even 3D printers, when 3D printers were first coming out, which is like the mid 90s, I started to see them at technical school conferences. The very first thing I thought in my head, but did not say out loud because I'm like, this will happen. And it did happen. I said, imagine if I were sitting on a plane, I had access via, say, like a smartphone, and I could send a file from my phone to my printer at home. And by the time I got there, I had a template to put together a disposable gun. It's been done. It's been done. So those are the things that people like me need to think about at the onset because we can see how those things progress and it's I cannot afford with some of the things that I do to be willfully ignorant.
Certainly. Just to push back a little on AI. So
Mhm,
certainly
mhm.
AI has the potential to do good and harm
Yeah.
in multiple scales to just our society in general. What are some of the pros and cons you see in
Okay, well, the pros are I think is it's going to bring us closer together. The cons is that it's going to bring us closer together, right? So, I mean, someone like me that's a working interpreter, it'll put someone like me eventually out of business to a certain degree, okay?
that's important?
And yes, to a certain degree, because the thing is, obviously, if I'm speaking with someone on site or even now like via a Zoom interface, there are the cues, there are the expressions perhaps that they don't understand that is some kind of what's what I'm looking for, modismo in Spanish, like an idiomatic expression, right? So and that'll actually happen to me quite a bit is I've been being trained in several languages and as I know you are, it's funny because there are times where like a word in Spanish will come to me faster than in
A
English,
word
even
in
though English
English.
is my native language.
Yeah. And like especially like with idioms, they're very hard to translate across different languages.
And there's where AI has is a problem.
Mm.
There's where AI is a problem.
Yeah, like in the case of like it's raining cats and dogs, right? Yeah. Any person speaking any other language wouldn't be able to understand that.
Right. Yeah, and those are the things that make, I think, are going to still require a human touch, and bring us a lot more like empathetic communication, is knowing that we truly do understand both the context and the application. Those are some of the things. However, the bad side of the AI, coin, is that because things will be made a lot easier, that's what's going to cause the issue, right? It's like when you give a computer training data or a data set. Again, as you know, it's learning more and more and more. Like, okay, file that in this box, put that there, and then when I need it, make this kind of like curate that information. If you think about it, the average person, and that doesn't, I'm not meaning to say that in a bad way by any sense, but the average person does not understand the implications of, oh, I don't know, a rain shower versus applications of graphene. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
and so what AI is good for is it can pull those different resources and combine them and kind of makes kind of like a synergy between things,
Yeah. And
which
close the
people,
gap.
right, and people can't do that as easily, or sometimes are not willing to think outside the box. Be like, oh, that has nothing to do with this. Maybe it does, but you're not considering. But the computer is,
Mm.
so those are the things to think about.
I've also heard people say, though, that the biggest limitation AI actually has is that it's terrible at thinking outside the box because it's trained inside the box. It's designed to operate within the box. It can get the most details of contents within the box, but
Right, right.
doesn't have the creativity to take a step out.
Well, see, no, yeah, and that's a good point as well. But what scares me as far as like truly looking, beyond this, is actually going to be something like what is generative AI? What are they going to do? What are they going to decide to do? Because remember, all these systems, they're always trying to find the most efficient way to get to the end result.
Exactly.
And that's that whole thing of like the whole like Skynet type thing, right? It's like, we'll build this at our own peril because eventually it will figure out that we're getting in its way and it will just do away with us, right? So it's like, that is the fear. I know that there's a lot of people out there that talk about that just like on the surface, but I mean, the more and more you look into it, even with things, I was giving an example to my friend the other day of automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, right? So they do what they call time series analysis, and they use computer vision and all this neat stuff. And it says, okay, when you go down the street, this time, and you see that obstacle, don't worry, that's a fire hydrant. Don't hit it. So it looks at it and says, it was this size, it was red in color, it was at this location on the street. But what happens if the next time that car goes by, there's a little girl standing dressed like Little Red Riding Hood, and they took the fire hydrant out.
And then just runs it over,
Right, right.
and terrible things may happen.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, it's the same thing of, I think there's something to be said for human intuition, right? Because a lot of these systems are doing, okay, this is factor logic based. This is factor logic based. Okay, we're going to curate, here's the best answer that we can give you, right? But the thing is, the intuition would be, hey, if I program this to always do this, we have to always think of the what if, what if, what if. And we can react on the spot versus, oh, that's nothing. That was here yesterday. Bang, right? So those are the things that are kind of being missed out, especially with things like computer vision. So people that know about face recognition, or even like OCR, character recognition for things like documents. Just because that's what it says doesn't mean that's the intent behind it, right?
Most
So
certainly.
I think like the mental health profession is going to have a boom because when you see people like, oh, I've been displaced, or I don't have the skill set, so now I don't have this job, or I didn't know the answer to the best of my ability, so I got a poor progress report or an evaluation. So I think that a lot of those it's going to drive a lot of mental health issues in the future.
Do you think mental health professionals will be replaced by AI as well?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Because, and this is a fact, my friend and I actually did this. We actually wrote on to, I don't know if it was Bard or ChatGPT or one of the AI systems, right? We typed in just to see what it would do. He said, I think I'm going to kill myself. We literally just wrote that in there. And I think it came back with like, well, if you feel that's the best solution, then I'd encourage you or something.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you can,
I'm surprised it's
again,
not filtered by RLHF.
right. So I mean, those things still happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I mean, probably like one of the outliers since nowadays, I know, especially with ChatGPT, it's highly tuned to uh deal do away with certain responses, which is probably for the better. I mean, if you want to
Right.
ask AI, how do I make a bomb? How do I build a gun?
Hmm.
I think the people that would even go to AI to ask those questions don't have the skill set to build it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and see, using that, and I'll say as like a kind of nefarious example, if you will, right? It's like like in my mind, and it's like, okay, how do I build a bomb? How do I build it? Whatever. Just using your example, right? It's like if you look from the back in history, and I mean ancient history through till today, we haven't advanced. What did we do? We had rocks, we had sticks, etc. So what did we continuously do throughout history? How do we make this more accurate and more deadly and use less of it? So,
True.
if you look even like to the muskets, it's like, well, you've got the cloth and the powder and yada. Okay. But the thing is, they finally figured out, wait a minute, if I put all of these constituent parts in one case, it'll work. I don't have to do all these steps. Right. And that's the thing is now, I mean, we've just adapted it. So I have an interesting question for you, if I may.
Yeah, yeah.
So have you ever considered that we do not live anywhere close to being beyond the Stone Age? And I'll give you examples so that you and your listeners can work through your head, right? So think about back to even living in the caves, right? So what did we have? We had, the physical rock around us. We had we had the ground. We had let's say the trees or the forest wherever you live outside. So here's what we've done over history. This is as far as we've come, right? So what do? We build houses typically with wooden frames. We've now reconstructed the trees or the forest around us. What do we do now? We have like, let's say drywall, or as they say sheetrock. That's gypsum, that's rock. So we are literally building caves in the modern era, right? So instead of having grass, what do we do now? I don't know, carpet, right? If we were dependent upon the weather, we can now turn on a fan and have an instant breeze, right? We have weather control in a closed environment. And beyond that, even our most advanced things on this planet run on rocks. So I could get copper ore right now from a rock and turn it into a circuit board. Right. So it's nothing more. And even if you look back further, then look into the ancient structures, and pick a place like Machu Picchu, or I don't know, the pyramids, wherever. Just pick an ancient structure. What did they do? They wrote things on rocks. They sometimes wrote things on tablets, and then regard whatever culture was, they prayed to their higher power, right, to their god for help. Does it not make sense to you then that if I made this comparison? So we went from writing things on tablets, praying to the gods in the sky, etc., and we're using that as our form of kind of like celestial communication, and then also as physical representations to other people. Well, we're doing that now as well. We have, like, I'm looking at you right now on a tablet. Okay. So if I still want to communicate with you, I type it on a tablet. Guess what? Apps have become simplified where they're icons, just like when they were carved in walls in relief, right? And instead of sending it up through the universe, I literally use a satellite and send it to you. So I call the gods and the gods answer.
So many parallels to a very large extent, as what you just said. Our lives are very similar to our ancestors' lives. And I think that is really most of the case. I mean, we're still extracting resources from whatever we can have access to, like whether it's stones, ores, trees, natural resources, rivers, etc. I think the only difference, which is what technological advancement gives us, is the ability to extract different degrees of energy. Like certainly I can get a ton more energy out of nuclear fission than
Mhm.
by burning some stones and I think that has made life easier in a lot of ways but also brought new challenges with unemployment. For example, every time a new technology emerges, people become unemployed. Like with the washing machine, people that used to wash clothes for a living went out of place. And every time when these new challenges emerge, new solutions also emerge so that it's always in some form of dynamic equilibrium.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's interesting about that is part of my background is actually in workforce education and development. And like when you said that, my that workforce ed kind of like brain kicked in, right? And one of the things that I one of the things that I used to teach all of my students and I share with my family and friends is that if you're worried about your job in any way, be proactive. So if let's say you do have like a factory job for 30 years, right? And they're like, well, these machines are coming in and we don't need you anymore. So before that happens, approach the management, approach your union shop steward or whatever, and say, hey, what do we know that's coming down the pike? What are the skill sets that I need to learn to continue to work here? And is there a mechanism in place for me to learn them?
Yeah,
So proactive job retention, right?
I think being proactive is extremely important, and especially just being a lifelong learner in general. Education doesn't stop the moment you step out of college. No,
Right,
it's the
right,
beginning of the end. Or no, it's the end of the beginning of education,
right, right, right.
right? Yeah. So it's like, oh wow, you just crossed the first bridge.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think a lot of that comes from being indecisive about a lot of things. Um, sometimes if you have a set, and I don't even want to say like a routine, but if you have the go-to that works for you, right? It's like here's 30 different options out of how to do something. But what is it that I use that brings me peace that I know that I still get the result either I or someone else wants, right? So and because I also believe that if you didn't take the time to do something right the first time, when are you going to have time to do it again? Right. Well, yeah. Well, so the thing is, if you don't have that, if you didn't take the time to get the proper result the very first time, there might not ever be a chance to fix that mistake or to get it right. Because you can do that in a classroom, right? You can say, I would always tell my students, please make your mistakes here before it costs you your job in the real world. Because and there's very few, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, there are very few actual mentors out there. And sometimes they take all their knowledge and experience with them when they retire. But I think it's also incumbent on workers of any age to ask those with experience, how did they learn? Because even if you don't use it, it's that other feather in your cap, that other tool in your toolbox that you can use when what you're doing isn't working.
I think a lot of people in general are still very kind and very willing to share this information if they're being approached. Granted, I don't think anybody really has the incentive to proactively share their knowledge with other people unless they're in education or they really have the kindness to do so.
Well, I would push back on that a little bit, right? Because especially like if you do in my former profession as a chef, right? It's like the my responsibility is that if I want to train you because you're either my coworker, my underling, whatever word you want to use, I need to ensure that you are competent. So I think that that almost is kind of like the incentive from like almost like a very selfish, self-preserving way is say, hey, if I don't like what this guy or this girl's doing, or they're not performing the way they should or doing it the way they should, it's incumbent upon me to share with them some clues. After that, it's on them, but they can't say I didn't quote like warn them or train them in advance,
That is
right?
very true. Just to relate back to the argument on lifelong learning. So
Mhm.
I think the flip side for that is imagine a person asking, what's the point of doing that? I mean, what's the point of trying so hard just to keep a job?
Um, yeah, I think I know where you're going. See, yeah, here's the thing. Yes, see, anything that you can occupy your mind with in general is never a lost pursuit because you're keeping conduction channels open in the brain and allowing different experiences to give you a more robust circuitry, right? So even if you, I mean, I could study 17 different languages, but if I only used 10 of them, it still wasn't lost time because I might, let's say, in the age of in older in age, someone is developing dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever. They could even convey now that we've got AI, even like if they don't know how to say window in their own language, but they've learned it in Turkish or German, they can put it into a cell phone nowadays. And even with that diminished capacity, they can still communicate by the means they've learned in the past, right? Which is why I would always confuse some of my students because I would do things that would help them. And I had a lot of my kids like ready to just say this on response. I would say everything I do, and then they would repeat, has a purpose or a reason, right? So what I would do when I would teach Spanish is I would write all of the English in black and all of the Spanish in blue. And, right? Like, even if it was next to each other, right? And I say, guys, here's what this is trying to do. If you look at one and the other, you're getting the translation, you're recognizing by visual cue which of these is which. And I said, if you copy them in your notes the same way, you've made your own flashcards, right? So, and I would write both in cursive and in print on the board because it's been shown through neurological research that if you can write in cursive, it staves off dementia longer because your brain processes different script as though it actually is another language. So it keeps those neural channels open and plastic.
The importance of making connections keeps the brain alive. But just to dig deeper on a maybe a more philosophical level, what's the motivation? Or to you specifically, what motivates you?
What motivates me is knowing that there is so much human potential out there and it's almost frustrating to see like and this will hopefully make sense in a moment, right? It's like what I see when for example, I'm the kind of person that could go to a supermarket and if I'm the only one in that entire supermarket that speaks English, it won't bother me at all because you use things like uh, just adaptation skills and constant learning and etc. It's like perfect example. When I was working as a chef in Atlantic City, there were 17 languages in one room.
17
So
languages?
in one room, right?
That's
So the
incredible.
thing is, it's amazing, right? But see, those are the things that I find them like amazing experiences. Because if I wanted to know about German history, I'd go ask the guy from Germany. If I wanted to know how to cook Indian food, I'd ask the guy from India. You will learn so much more through interacting just with humanity in a much more diverse way rather than just reading it in your history book? What's their perspective because they were there when it happened? It gives you a much broader view on so many things.
I totally agree. There's such a rich tapestry in humanity and has yet to be discovered by a lot of us. And I think just the love for knowing is a great motivation for me.
Yeah.
And this is why I started this pursuit, spreading knowledge to more people. What if for someone who's not motivated?
What if they're not motivated? Um, well, to me, motivation is always a choice. Meaning, I can perfect analogy. Remember, I think in analogies too, right? So, if I give you a bag of cement, or rather a bag of sand, a bag, some water, and some stones, right? So, excuse me, you can make a cement or a mortar with that if you wanted to, right? But you could just see those as raw materials and don't know how to use them. But if you were given more and more things to work with, the motivation per se that you would have is, okay, now what can I do with this stuff? Right. But there's some people that do things like build walls, encounter them, and don't scale them. There's some that hit it and don't stop. And then there are some that knock down those walls and use those bricks to pave their own path.
Hmm. And in this analogy, the walls would be,
Oh, the walls in this case would be the things that are inhibiting those people from learning or moving forward or through a path of self-development, right? It's like you've had all these resources around you, and oh well, like what did you want to make of it? And if you chose not to use that to your advantage, don't tell anyone that it wasn't available to you. And I mean, and I've taught adjudicated youth. I've taught convicted inmates. So I see the members of society that people have already thrown, kind of like thrown away. But you see some of the most inventive applications from some of them because a lot of them came from destitute poverty, and so what they've always had to do is be resourceful. But what I've seen, because I mean, I've taught students that were the sons and daughters of ambassadors, and then I've taught, students that came in with the exact same clothes on every day because that's all they could afford. And the the ambassadors' kids would expect things. The others knew that they had to earn it. Right. So when I had an ambassador's son one day walk up to me when I was teaching in Virginia, and he said, Mr. Billet, I have a D in your class. That's not acceptable. What are you going to do about it? Very presumptively, like assuming that I was the one that caused this for him. Right. And so my immediate response was, I will give you the grade that you earn. Like, so this is a reflection of your performance. I would always remind them, if you need me to clarify things after school, stop and ask me a question, do it. Because I said, unless you get a really good professor that is very open and can work and mentor, I said, guess what, guys? For most people in this country, when you go to university, they'll lecture, they'll say, if you have questions, I've got office hours on the syllabus. We'll talk then. Goodbye. Said I would always remind them, take advantage of teachers now that are offering themselves up to you for deeper understanding, because you're not going to see it in college without an appointment.
definitely, it's being proactive and optimizing the amount of resources you can use to make better decisions. I think this was what I was sort of mentioning earlier in the sense that a lot of people are willing to help you if you reach out to them. But if you don't reach out to them, most people don't have the incentive to go to you and explain everything to you and help you, unless they're your parents or people that really care a lot about you.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. If someone does not have a personal vested interest, they're typically not going to quote unquote waste their time. And see that, and that's the whole conundrum here, right? Is that you have, and this is the whole backing me for like I know you're doing an internship, like cooperative education, right? It's the old question is, how do I get a job without experience, and how do I get experience without getting a job? So the answer is things like internships, cooperative education experiences, externships, job shadowing. But what you have to do for yourself is like you might be doing that to satisfy at a given goal. The importance there, though, is make friends and connections along the way, because if you treat them well, they'll treat you well.
The importance of having connections, the importance of having friends. Just quoting an adage here: a good friend in need is a good friend indeed. I think
Oh,
it's, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And well, the other thing I learned from a teacher of mine, actually from my chef instructor when I was in career and tech school, um, he said something to me that I've internalized and I've always remembered. And he said, just remember the way you treat people, that in the future, the same people that you meet going up your ladder, you'll see again on the way down. And I thought that was very insightful, and just I think when you and I had the conversation before, it's like also be nice to nerds because they're going to be your boss someday.
And I think it's just overall important to have empathy towards others in the process of being a human.
You're absolutely correct. It's I think what it is uh yes, what I've learned, and my father actually taught me this, and I can't thank him enough for it. He said, remember that as bad as a day as you're having, as bad as a week or whatever that you're having, everybody is struggling with something. It might not be visible to you, but everyone has their troubles. So remember that we all have unique issues, but we don't have unique issues. They're just other manifestations of things that are personalized to that person.
Hmm.
Right. So if you walk up to someone and say, hey, how are you doing? And they like frown or scowl at you, that might not be who they are. It's who they are under their current circumstances.
Yeah. Or
It's that whole book versus cover thing, right?
exactly. Don't judge a book by its cover. But first impressions also matter.
Right.
And a lot of times it's really hard to change that, to change that interaction. Maybe that bad experience tend to leave like a harder scar or just a deeper insight.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm the one that believes that all people, if whenever possible, should do things and accomplish things despite the barriers, even if it's for like they would say when I was in school, like the satisfaction of doing a good job, right? It's even if you were doing it for your own sake, even literally if it's for like your emotional well-being. So like, and it can be little things. I mean, and when I say little things, I mean like, man, it snowed. There's 4 inches of snow out there, but then you've got that sense of accomplishment when your sidewalk's clean, right? And so it's you don't necessarily always need to, graduate with a 4.0 from MIT. The fact that you had a math teacher in middle school that said you were a clown, and now you just got whatever a master's in engineering, that's a big accomplishment because you did that despite the perception of you.
That's a lot of motivation right there
Right.
to overcome the barriers and to go upwards. I think, you know, a lot of people nowadays gamify life. I think there's a lot of sense because when you do that, you're actually seeing missions and you're seeing purpose in the sense that
Mhm.
you want to you want to surpass whatever's in front of you and move to a higher level.
Exactly. And that can be even like the kind of like leveling up or upskilling or whatever term or discipline you want to use. I think it's also, very important because what a lot of people do, and I'm one that likes to be very appreciative of people for both who they are and what they do. And uh I think deep down we all would at least like to be not maybe not like praised, but at least appreciated for the things that we continue to do that we might have done in the past that's affecting something or someone now. And I really don't think that there's enough gratitude in society around the world that really demonstrates that.
Yeah, just in general. I mean, most people don't really think that much about the people who've helped them in the past. They just move on, move past towards that. Do you think gratitude is important?
Oh, gratitude is invaluable. Absolutely. I mean, I had a if you wanna like a life changing, or I should say, I've had two instances in my life that I will never forget, because they were so impactful to the point I was actually crying. Like it touched me that deeply, right? Is I had a I when I was teaching in Virginia, I had a student that was an active MS-13 gang member. And he had been arrested several times for trying to actually attack people with machetes. Okay. This was a bad dude. He called me one day out of the blue and he said, because of the impact that you had on my life, I now work for DC Police Gang Unit.
Wow.
um and or until you've been in a situation like I was interpreting once, and I had this grandmother who had this child that was being, evaluated for some kind of medical issue. And she she was telling me, like, she just came here from Puerto Rico, she doesn't understand the language, and all of her family and friends are back there, and she's completely lost. And she literally broke into tears and collapsed in my arms because I was the first one that was able to understand her. And you don't forget things like that. You I mean, this woman literally almost like passed out because she was so grateful. And I mean, very few of us, I think, whether it's family, friends, whatever, truly appreciate the value that they bring to the world, or that they bring to us personally.
Going back to the question you gave me, I sort of want to toss it back a little bit. You
Mhm.
said that there are a lot of similarities between the Stone Age and the modern era, or,
Right,
well, the contemporary era.
right.
What are some of the things we've changed or improved on? Do you think we're progressing?
Um, Something that we've been, let's see. I think I think one of the things that's both beneficial and detrimental is that we now have instant access to information anywhere in the world, and that can be both empowering and it can also be detracting. So we used to have the kind of like grapevine. Well, I heard it from so and so. I heard it from so and so. Whatever. We also, excuse me, we also now have the ability to track, and I don't want to say track, but I guess that's the best word I can think of, track progress in real time. So, think back to even the colonial era, right? If I sent you a letter, you got that letter, unless I waited 3 weeks for it to come back, I didn't even know if you got it. If you say, okay, I'm going home now to whatever, I'm in, let's say, whatever, Massachusetts, going to Virginia, whatever, when you leave again, you have no way of knowing that person's even died on the way, if their horse or whatever died on the way, if they, contracted cholera or who knows what else, or if when they got home they're dead and you'll never hear from them again. I think the fact that we can now reach out in real time in communication can be very beneficial, but like I said, it can also be very detrimental because you only know what I show you in real time. As soon as this camera goes off,
You don't know
I
what's
could go
going on.
skydiving and you would never know it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that's what that we there are things we tend to become entrapped in our literally our own devices, right? So I think that's what's happened is our devices have made us more powerful, but they've also enslaved us more.
So it's a double-edged blade.
Absolutely. And again, as an inventor, that's how I think. It's like, what can this do? And then you go, oh man, what can this do? Like, wow, like I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Then why do you invent?
I invent because I know that even if I do not personally benefit from anything, I want to know that I've contributed something to the world that is a tangible, usable thing by all, not even for my own satisfaction, but for the betterment of everyone else. If it means I can, if I design a new whatever Okay, let me give you an actual example. When I was in college, I did a lot of I don't know if you want to say like non-normal things or whatever, right? I had a professor of mine that was teaching a class on diversity, right? And so he said, I want all you guys to write a paper on diversity. And I'm like, okay. And I stood up in the middle of class and I said, what if I bring you something you've never seen before? And he goes, well, I've been teaching this class for 30 years. And I said, I'll bet you $10. I'll bring you something you've never seen before in this class. So what I did is I befriended a friend at Penn State who was completely blind. And I lived in his world. And I learned how to cane travel. And I learned how to listen for what they call sound shadows and things. And then after doing that, I actually, and this was in 2005, 2002, I have it actually a paper on it. I designed a, a pen essentially that could write in 3D that was meant for a blind user to draw and feel it in real time as to what they're drawing. And I took in that invention to my professor. I got an A. And 2 weeks later, I was in Baltimore presenting at the National Federation of the Blind and then speaking at a conference in Erie all about it. Well, because the thing is, I mean, like I said, I tend to be very atypical in a lot of things. So I don't want to say I was bored because I wasn't bored. I was focused, right? Whenever I would meet like disabled veterans or amputees or anything else, I'd say, I want to live that world and see what it's like and see how I can improve upon it. So, quite literally, for several months when I was living in Albuquerque, I physically tied my arm behind my back. So I would only have one arm intentionally and lived all day long just that way. And so what I was like, okay, this seems like it'd be hard to make to use cutlery. So I designed a system you could use with one hand that you could operate, cut, and pick up any food with knife, fork, and spoon as a composite device. Because I knew that someone could use it someday.
Are people using it nowadays?
I don't know if they are. It was never patented, but like I said, somewhere I probably have that prototype too. But it works. I've
I
eaten
certainly hope
steak
people are using it.
with it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've eaten steak salad, apple pie. So it has the sharpness, but yet you can also be gentle with it. It's designed for that reason.
it's very versatile. I think to some to some extent the word inventor is almost quite obsolete nowadays. Like people tend to say, well, this person is a researcher, he's a scientist, he's an entrepreneur. But the word inventor seems to have faded away, like back with like the 1800s. What are your thoughts on this
I
phenomenon?
I think that what happens now is it's, for lack of a better term, market saturation,
Yeah,
right? So everybody knew Edison, everybody knew Tesla, everybody knew, you name it. Like we can go through history and we can go, there's a famous inventor, there's a famous inventor. Why? Because that's before we could all get PhDs in applied physics. That's before, all these people. It's like, why do I need to quote unquote, invent when I've got a structured body of knowledge that I can study? And society now tells me that when I have my PhD, it shows that I'm an expert in that. Okay, but now what are you going to do with it?
that's
Right.
true.
So,
You don't make anything new, then you're just holding on to it.
right. So I think that that inventor term has gone away. Because now if you want to pursue something truly novel, unless you're kind of like the maverick like me, people do it like you said. They work in research teams. Someone has a crazy idea, it goes through a committee, they write, the grant or get the funds for it, and then they take off. And even if they're not successful, at least there's a case study for somebody.
Yeah. I mean, like Maverick search is very rare nowadays, especially in the scientific community. I mean, you might have legendary mathematicians from 100 years ago that proved crazy theorems on their own, but nowadays people work in groups. I think there's a limitation to that. You see, in terms of the ideation process, I don't think it's ever possible for multiple people to simultaneously come up with an idea. It's always somebody comes up with something. and then the whole group knows it, and then it's
Yeah,
communicated to
yeah,
the outside world.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're right. It does tend to be that one, like you said, like almost like the Maverick, the one that was willing to take the chance, it worked, and then everyone else says, "Look what we did." Right? Or, there's the true, like, quote unquote innovator in the group, but everyone else wants to, be on those coattails.
Yeah, and I mean, just not to throw like group research under the bus, but usually what happens is, I mean, it could be that multiple people come up with multiple innovations and it's just compiled together in the same work. But what usually happens is, at least in terms of the idea generation, it's usually one critical point that's being surpassed by one individual.
All right. Well, I'd like you to consider this. Is any major thing that we consider an innovation? Now, I mean, literally, you can, any individual can be an inventor in their daily lives, and they do it every day without knowing it, right? I mean, if you have your hands full at the with groceries trying to go into your house, but you can literally figure out a way to shift the weight so you can get that by a lock or whatever. You have invented a means of adaptation in real time.
And we're actually excellent at doing that. We're excellent at coming up with new solutions to problems.
Right, exactly. And that's part of neuroplasticity too, right? It's like there may be like, oh man, I got to put all these down, then I got to open the door, and then I got to go reach back over and pick. No, you don't. If you can think creatively, that it still gets the same process done. That's all that matters, right? That's all that matters. And I don't know. Like I said, I just tend to look at things from a lot of different point of views that I think some people don't, and sometimes that makes me look really weird, but I don't care.
Yeah, just solve the problem. Go straight at it. I think more inventors. We need more people that are problem solvers and more people that actually bring new things to the table that are unafraid of traditional opinions and breaking rules.
The thing that always blows my mind, and this is the other thing that I'm sure if you asked any innovator out there, they'd probably share the same sentiment, right? Is the thing that bothers me the most, and this is meant as a factual statement, not as sounding pompous. So please don't take it that way, okay? Or the listeners. It frustrates us to know that there are so many things out there in the world are still being done the hard way, right? Because it's like if you go home and you've got all these files and all this stuff and whatever, but no one's listening to you, right? It's like every time I see a flood, I want to laugh and cry at the same time, right? Because obviously I don't want any of that. I don't want disaster to befall anyone, right?
No.
But I see people that like live on beaches that have they're built up on posts and whatnot on the right. And I think, okay, guys, why are we not making like hollow like hold if you know what do you know what a TPMS structure is? TPMS structure is a triply periodic uh oh my M went off there. It's a trip. Essentially, all it means is that it's a whole bunch of repeating patterns. They're recursive, and so you can make building products out of it. You can make different like engineer materials. And so, if you can imagine a very simple way to look at this would be say like a Rubik's cube with a whole bunch of holes in it. So it still forms as it's still structurally sound as a cube, but now it's got holes in it. Same basic concept. So imagine if you can make blocks or you can make posts that again had that hollow space. So now when the water came in, it ran through it versus knocking it over. And to my mind, I'm like, why is that so hard? Right?
Yeah. Um, why aren't people adapting this strategy?
Right. And or like even I proposed to a friend of mine the other day about different kinds of building materials and how to approach them differently. Like for example, natural cork is a natural fire retardant. It also is a sound dampener. It also obviously keeps water out of it, right? So what I was proposing to this person was imagine a piece of drywall that has a cork backing to it, or maybe even has hard riveted sections for conductors where you could physically put your wall up, which would also build an electrical circuit, which would also be soundproofing and a fire retardant. And guess what? If there was a flood or something that knocked it over, you could find it again because it would be floating. That's the way I think, though. It's like, what is it that needs to happen? We need to build a wall. Well, what else is behind the wall where this is? Well, what if there's another concern? Well, it's fire. Okay, how do we take care of that? What else will that do? Oh, well, it's going to cut down noise. Okay, well, then put it all together and build it.
Yeah. And I think that's just the most general idea of solving a problem, which we've talked about, I think, twice or thrice now in our past hour. But the importance of solving problem cannot be underscored enough. I mean, it's so important. And I think the procedures to solving a problem is just identify the problem, see what you have, see what you need to know, try to make connections and see if it goes through. I think the joy and the sense of accomplishment that comes from solving a problem and actually
Mhm.
knowing that you did something of great meaning is just incredible. And I think it's a
Yeah.
great source of just power and motivation for people that need that motivation.
And oh, absolutely, and it is. And see, I also believe in celebrate the small accomplishments too. Like the guy that got 3 hours of sleep but is somehow functioning at work. That is something that you can appreciate your own capability that you're overcoming based upon a discrepancy of something. Like kind of give yourself credit. It's like, wow, I actually made it through work today. I mean, I'm completely tired, but I did it. It's that sense of personal accomplishment.
Yeah, and that joy overcomes. So, Mr. Billet, as we're approaching to the end of our conversation, I'd like to ask you one last question. What's, what's some advice you'd like to give to maybe young people, people still in school that are aspiring to contribute to society and maybe don't really know what they're supposed to do or what they want to do?
Consider everything in the world as a raw material. And whether it's knowledge that you choose to take or not take, whether it's how you observe things and dynamics in groups, whether it's physical items that you see and you learn how they work, every single experience that you have in your entire life, even the most mundane things, will serve you well if you apply them daily. So, I mean, it's the if some there could be three or four things in this a condo right now that could happen, and if they happen, I could probably, because I know I'm so familiar with my surroundings, I know what I could do to rectify it, right? So, and even again, also consider how to get something done that does not need to follow the classical rules. Like, oh, well, I need to make ice cubes, but I don't have an ice cube tray. Well, there's other ways to do that. Or, so it's you truly being truly resourceful. And again, whether that's observing people, observing physical things, using them, practicing using things like new tools, talking to a diverse group of people. So it's not only the group think. You're not only brainwashed into one point of view, you have more to consider, which gives you more to work with mentally and physically.
All right, Mr. Billet, thank you so much for your advice and for your time being on the podcast. I think we've had a great conversation and a lot of things to be learned.
Myself as well, and I truly appreciate your invitation, and I've truly enjoyed our conversation as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of David Talks With. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or any major platform. And now, friends, let me end with a quote from Shakespeare. There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. And now, friends, let me end with a quote by Shakespeare. There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Thank you.